July 22, 1988. High above Manhattan's bustling streets, a grieving mother clutches the railing of her 14th floor terrace, tears streaming as her 23-year-old son perches on the edge. She whispers desperate pleas, reaches for his hand. He turns, eyes locked on hers, and utters 4 words that echo in her nightmares to this day. Then gravity claims him. This shattering moment was only one chapter in Gloria Vanderbilt's relentless saga of maternal heartbreak. 4 sons, 4 lives shadowed by unimaginable sorrow. But to understand how a family arrives at a moment like that, to truly understand it, you have to go all the way back to a little girl born into the richest family in America, who spent her entire childhood feeling like the poorest person in the room. Gloria Laura Vanderbilt was born on February 20th, 1924. Her father, Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, was heir to one of the greatest fortunes America had ever produced: railroad money. Generational wealth so vast it had begun to feel like gravity, inescapable, invisible, crushing. Reginald drank, he gambled, he spent as if the number could never get smaller. He died when Gloria was 18 months old. He left behind a trust fund worth $5 million, roughly $90 million today. He left behind a toddler who would never remember his face. And he left behind a wife, beautiful, restless, completely unsuited to motherhood, who had no intention of slowing down. And this is where the damage begins. Not with the money, not with the famous name, with the mother. Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt was beautiful, impossibly, dangerously beautiful. The kind of woman who walked into a room and made everyone else feel slightly less real. She was witty and charming and magnetic, and she had married into one of the greatest fortunes in American history at the age of 18. And then her husband died. She had a toddler, a fortune in trust, and she decided that none of that was going to slow her down. She took little Gloria and moved to Europe, not for a holiday, not for a season. She left. She set up a life, a real, permanent, luxurious life, in the grand hotels and villas of Paris, Biarritz, the French Riviera, London. She moved through these places the way wealthy, beautiful, unattached women moved through the 1920s and 30s. Freely, constantly, with absolute priority given to her own pleasure, and her daughter came along for the ride, not as the centre of it, as a footnote. Little Gloria, 2 years old, then 3, then 5, grew up in the background of her mother's life. There were nannies, yes. There was Dodo, the beloved nurse Emma Keislich, who was the closest thing Gloria had to a real maternal figure. She dressed her, read to her, held her when she cried, showed up every single day with the reliability that Gloria's own mother never managed. But her mother? Her mother was always somewhere else, at the party, on the yacht, with the man. Witnesses who would later testify in court described what they saw. Gloria's mother was frequently absent, sometimes for days at a time. She was seen drunk in the presence of the child. She kept company with a circle whose behaviour was, to put it generously, not oriented around child welfare. There were allegations about her relationship with a marchioness, a female companion whose closeness to Gloria's mother raised eyebrows and eventually became one of the most explosive elements of the custody trial. The household, witnesses said, was chaotic, adult, indifferent to the small dark-eyed child moving quietly through it, and little Gloria absorbed every bit of it. Here is what we know about children who grow up this way. Not unloved, exactly, but unseen, uncentered, existing in the orbit of a parent who is always the main character, which means the child is always the supporting role. Those children develop a very specific kind of hunger, not for things, for attention, for the feeling that they matter, for someone to stop moving long enough to look at them and stay. They become hypervigilant. They learn to read adult moods with extraordinary precision, because reading the room is how you stay safe. They become acutely sensitive to rejection, because rejection has been the default state of the world since before they could name it. And they become desperate seekers, desperate lovers, chasing the one relationship that will finally make them feel chosen. Gloria Vanderbilt was 5, then 7, then 9, and she was already learning all of this. She was learning that the person who was supposed to love her most would always choose something else. She was learning that love is conditional, contingent, something you earn and then earn again. She was learning that being beautiful and rich and well-dressed is no protection at all against loneliness. And she was learning, without anyone telling her, to stop expecting her mother to come back. That last one was the wound that never closed, because here is the cruelest part. Gloria's mother did love her, in her own way, in the limited, distracted, fundamentally selfish way that some people love, meaning they love the idea of you. They love you when it's convenient. They love you when you fit into their life rather than when you need them to step into yours. She loved her daughter the way a person loves something beautiful they own. And Gloria, being a child, could feel the difference between that and the real thing. Even at 5 years old, she knew. Children always know. By the time the custody trial arrived in 1934, Gloria was 10 years old and had already spent a decade being quietly, comprehensively failed by the one person she needed most. The trial didn't create the wound. It just put it on the front page. And then the judge called little Gloria herself into his chambers. She was 10 years old. He asked if she wanted to live with her mother. She said no, that she'd been happier with her aunt, that her mother frightened her. Whether those were truly her own words, or whether they'd been shaped by the adults who surrounded her, all of whom had their own stakes in the outcome, nobody can say for certain. What we know is that Gertrude won. Gloria's mother walked out of the courthouse into a city that had already moved on, diminished, defeated, allowed only supervised visits with the daughter she'd failed to fight for. And little Gloria went to live at the Whitney estate on Long Island, safe, stable, surrounded by horses and cousins and rolling lawns, and shattered in ways she wouldn't spend the next 80 years trying to repair. She grew up believing love was something you fought for in court, that the people who claimed to love you would use it against you when it suited them. That being chosen and being safe were two completely different things. She grew up desperate to build the family she never had, to be the mother she never got. What she couldn't know, what none of us know when we're running towards something, is that we carry our wounds into the very thing we're running toward. And her wounds were already packing their bags. Gloria came of age in the 1940s with everything the world could see and nothing it couldn't. Beauty, wealth, a name that opened every door, and no idea what love actually looked like. She married for the first time at 17, Pat DiCicco, a Hollywood agent, handsome, well-connected and, as Gloria would discover fast, cruel in ways that leave marks that don't show. He called her degrading names. He hit her. He grabbed her by the head and drove it into walls. She described a marriage that looked glamorous from the outside and was a chamber of horrors within. She escaped after 4 years and then, almost immediately, ran toward the next thing, because that's what you do when you've never learned to be still with yourself. Leopold Stokowski was 63 years old. Gloria was 21. The age gap was 42 years. The world was scandalized. Gloria was unmoved. Stokowski saw her as an artist, an intellect, a real person, and after DiCicco, that felt like oxygen. They had 2 sons, Stan, Leopold Stanislaus, born in 1950, Christopher, born in 1952. But the marriage frayed. Stokowski was brilliant and controlling, isolating Gloria even as he encouraged her art. When Gloria was 30, she had a brief affair with Frank Sinatra. Not recklessness. A woman in a cage proving the door wasn't locked. She and Stokowski divorced in 1955. Stan was 5. Christopher was 3. Even then, the two boys were already heading in different directions. Stan seemed to sense early that the Vanderbilt orbit was dangerous. He quietly, deliberately moved toward privacy. Not aloof. Deliberate. There is a difference. Christopher was more sensitive, more porous. He absorbed the turbulence of the split household, carrying 2 famous surnames and the weight of both, never quite sure which expectations to meet. He would later pursue music under pseudonyms, refusing to trade on either Stokowski or Vanderbilt. He wanted his work to stand on its own. Gloria married again. Sidney Lumet, the director from 1956 to 1963. Genuine partnership, no children, an amicable ending. And then, on Christmas Eve, 1963, the one that mattered. Wyatt Emery Cooper, a writer from Mississippi. Her own age? Where every other man she'd loved had been performing power, performing passion, Wyatt simply was. He wasn't famous. He wasn't spectacular. He showed up every single day. For Gloria, for Stan and Christopher, now teenagers, and eventually for the 2 sons they had together. Carter Vanderbilt Cooper, born January the 27th, 1965. Anderson Hayes Cooper, born June 3rd, 1967. 4 sons, 4 different fathers. One mother who had finally, improbably, found what she'd been reaching for her whole life, a family that felt like home. For 14 years, they had it. January 1978. Wyatt Cooper needed open-heart surgery. He was 50. The operation was supposed to be routine. He died on the operating table, just like that. No goodbye that knew itself as one. One Tuesday, he was there, and then he was not. Gloria was 53. Carter was 12. Anderson was 10. In a single afternoon, the family Wyatt had spent 14 years holding together lost the thing at its centre. Anderson would later say his father's death changed him at the most fundamental level. The boy he'd been before age 10, open, extroverted, willing to attach, was different from the person he became after. He grew watchful, careful, afraid to get too close to people who might disappear. And Carter took it even harder. Anderson would later describe his brother as someone who felt things too deeply for the world's roughness. Carter graduated from Dalton, went to Princeton, excelled. He built the architecture of a life going according to plan. But underneath, something had fractured in January 1978. Something that wouldn't fully surface for another 10 years. And then, in the same year Wyatt died, the family lost someone else. Someone who hadn't died. Someone who chose to leave. Christopher was 25, engaged to a woman named April Sandmeyer. He had his music, his carefully built private life, a future finally taking shape. And then Gloria's therapist, a woman named Christ Zois, interfered in Christopher's relationship with April. The details were never fully public. What's known, the interference destroyed the engagement entirely. Whether Zois had ulterior motives, whether she was manipulating Gloria for access to the Vanderbilt fortune, those questions would end up in a courtroom in 1993. But in 1978, the damage was immediate. Christopher cut off all contact with his family, not just Gloria, all of them, his mother, his brothers, everyone. He vanished into a private life somewhere in New York State and did not look back. Anderson was 10 years old. He had adored Christopher. Despite the 15-year gap between them, Christopher had been real to him. Solid. One of the few fixed points in a family that didn't have enough of them. And now, in the same year he lost his father, he lost his brother. Not to death, to silence, which is, in its own way, the harder loss. With death, there is a grave, a date, the grim mercy of finality. With silence, there is only the open question, the unanswered phone, the years that pile up without ever telling you whether the person is okay. You carry it like a question you're not allowed to ask out loud. For Anderson, the question of Christopher would stay open for 38 years. He was 10 years old, and the losses were not finished with him. By 1988, Carter Cooper was 23. He'd graduated from Princeton the year before. He was working at American Heritage magazine as a book editor. Military history, politics, the things that had always fascinated him. Smart, thoughtful, building a life piece by piece. But something was wrong beneath all of it. He'd recently broken up with his girlfriend, Pearson Marks. The ending hit harder than it should, landing on wounds that had never closed. He was in therapy, being treated for depression. He was taking medication, including an asthma inhaler that Gloria would later believe triggered something in his brain chemistry that afternoon. Medical experts were skeptical, but when someone you love dies the way Carter died, you need a why. You will spend years constructing one. He came to visit her that afternoon. He talked about moving back home. They made plans, had lunch. She made his favourite, spaghetti. Afterward, Carter lay down on the sofa. Gloria picked up the New Yorker and read to him. They had always done this quiet ritual that said something about their closeness that neither of them had words for. The story she read was White Angel. A young man runs through glass at a party and is killed. They discussed it when she finished. Then Carter fell asleep and Gloria left the room. When she came back, he was gone. She found him upstairs, in Anderson's room, the one they'd discussed just hours earlier. He was on the terrace, but he wasn't himself. His eyes were wrong, disoriented beyond drowsiness. He didn't know where he was. He didn't seem to know who she was. She reached for him. He put his arm out to stop her. She begged him, told him she loved him, that she was right here, that nothing was too big. He looked at her, and he asked if he would ever feel again. Then he let go. Gloria lunged forward. In that fraction of a second, she thought about going after him. She chose not to. One son, not two. Carter fell 14 stories and landed in the alley behind the building. He was wearing casual clothes, no shoes. He was 23 years old. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. It was a Friday. 4 days later, he was buried at St. James Episcopal Church, beside his father, the father whose death, 10 years earlier, had started the unravelling that ended here. Stan was there, Anderson was there. Christopher was not. A family at a graveside, 2 brothers missing, one in the ground, one somewhere in the city, unreachable. A mother who had watched her son fall and chosen, in the last possible moment, to stay. Years later, Gloria would say the world split apart in that moment, that the woman before July 22nd, 1988, and the woman after, those were not entirely the same person. How could they be? She would carry Carter's last question for the rest of her life, not as something to answer, as something to hold. Anderson Cooper was 21 when his brother died. In the months that followed, he became a war correspondent. He went to Somalia, Bosnia, Rwanda, places where most people ran away and he ran toward. He would explain it years later. He said he needed to be around suffering that was immediate, where life and death wasn't metaphorical. He needed to test himself, to find out whether he could survive what should break a person. He was running his grief through his body, taking it somewhere it had company. Because the question Carter asked, "Will I ever feel again?" had a visceral answer in a war zone. You feel everything, every moment, because the alternative is being dead. He built a career at Channel 1, then ABC, then CNN. His name became a household one. The success was real, but it was armor. The grief was underneath. He kept moving because standing still meant feeling all 3 losses at once. His father, his brother Christopher, his brother Carter. And Gloria kept moving too. In 1978, the year she lost Wyatt, the year Christopher vanished, she launched her designer jeans line. She lost the love of her life in January. By December, she was building an empire. That is not a paradox. That is who Gloria Vanderbilt was. She had learned it as a child, watching a mother who survived by never stopping. You don't stand still when things break. You make something. You create. The jeans sold in the millions. The swan logo became iconic. Her face was everywhere. And then Carter died, and the drive accelerated again. She painted vivid, urgent canvases, full of a grief too large for words. Not pretty paintings, honest ones. They hurt to look at in the way that honest grief hurts when it's visible. She talked about Carter in interviews with a love so unguarded it made people uncomfortable. Because real grief always makes people uncomfortable. It reminds them of their own. She refused silence, because silence would have meant agreeing that Carter was something to be ashamed of. In 1993, she sued the therapist who had destroyed her relationship with Christopher. The jury awarded her $1.5 million. The money meant nothing. Christopher didn't come back. The door stayed closed. 38 years. That is how long he stayed away. He made music under pseudonyms, names the public didn't know. He lived in seclusion. No contact with Gloria. No contact with Anderson. No contact with Stan. His former fiancée, April Sandmeyer, whose own life had been derailed by that same therapist, stayed connected to Christopher through all of it. How exactly, we don't know. But she stayed, and Christopher remained a ghost, present only in his absence, until something changed. In 2016, Gloria Vanderbilt was 92 years old. Anderson approached her with a proposal, a documentary, a real conversation, mother and son, no filter, about loss, about survival, about the things they'd never quite said out loud. Nothing Left Unsaid premiered on HBO in April 2016. They talked about Wyatt, about Carter, about the custody trial, about Anderson's years in war zones, about all of it. They never mentioned Christopher, not once. It was not an oversight, it was a choice. Gloria would not expose him, even in a film about everything else. His privacy was his. She would not take it from him. And somewhere, wherever Christopher had been living for 38 years, he watched it. He saw his 92-year-old mother, still sharp, still herself, still carrying his name in the silence around it. He saw Anderson, the 10-year-old boy he'd left behind, now nearly 50, talking about loss with a composure that cost him something visible. He saw the family he had walked away from, still standing, and something shifted. Maybe it was his mother's age, the understanding that some windows close permanently. Maybe it was watching Anderson describe the brothers he had lost, and realizing Anderson had included Christopher in that count. That his disappearance to a 10-year-old boy had registered as another death. Or maybe after 38 years, Christopher was simply tired of carrying it. April Sandmeyer reached out to the family on his behalf. She became the bridge. She helped people who no longer had language for each other find the first careful words. Anderson confirmed publicly that they had reconnected. They met 3 times, 3 meetings, after 38 years. 2 men who were brothers by blood and strangers in almost every other way. Anderson had been 10 when Christopher left. He was now 48. He had built an entire life his brother knew nothing about. Christopher had been 25 when he walked away. He was now 63. What do you say when that much time has passed? Anderson never shared what they said. He confirmed they had met. They had reconciled. That was all. Gloria and Christopher saw each other too, for the first time since 1978. She was 92. He was in his 60s. What did they say to each other? Did she apologize? Did he explain? Did they find forgiveness, or just something quieter? 2 people who had hurt each other finally admitting they were too tired to keep the wound open? We will never know. Some conversations belong only to the people in the room. For 3 years, the reconciliation held. Gloria got to know the son who had been a ghost. Anderson got his brother back. Stan, steady, quiet Stan, had all his brothers accounted for at last. Not whole, not as if none of it had happened, but together. More than they'd had. It was enough. Gloria Vanderbilt died on June 17, 2019. She was 95 years old. The diagnosis, advanced stomach cancer, had come just a month before, sudden and final, with barely enough time to say what needed saying. Her last weeks were spent in Anderson's apartment, surrounded by her paintings, her books, the evidence of a life spent making things. Every time he left, he told her he loved her. Every time, she told him she loved him too. That she knew he knew. He did. He had always known. That night, Anderson went on air. He didn't have to do it the way he did. He is a professional. He knows how to hold large emotions in small containers. He chose to open the container. He talked about his mother, not the heiress, not the brand, not the trial or the dynasty. His mother, the woman who had gotten up every morning and made something, even when making anything required an act of will most people couldn't sustain. He wept. And across the country, people who had watched Anderson Cooper be unmovable for decades watched him move, and finally understood what he had been carrying. Her estate was valued at approximately $1.5 million. Not the hundreds of millions the Vanderbilt name conjured. The money had been spent on living, on art, on the lavish and beautiful way Gloria moved through the world, as if making up for lost time since she was 15 months old. She left her Manhattan co-op to Stan, the remainder to Anderson. Christopher received nothing, not because the reconciliation hadn't been real, but because the estate planning predated his return by years. Anderson had never expected anything. Gloria had been clear his entire life. She didn't believe in inheritance. She thought it destroyed initiative. He had learned she was right. She was buried in the Vanderbilt family cemetery on Staten Island, beside Wyatt, beside Carter, the husband who had made her feel safe, the son she had watched fall. The three of them finally in the same place. 4 sons. Stan is in his mid-70s, quiet, private, still running his landscaping business in New York and New England, still refusing the Vanderbilt story, still tending gardens. He made the wisest choice anyone in this family ever made. He chose ordinary over spectacular, his own life over the myth. He has been doing it for 50 years. Christopher is in his early 70s, still reclusive, still making music under names the public doesn't know. He had 3 years with Gloria before she died. He got something back before the door closed permanently. Whether he found peace in the life he built, only he knows. But he was there at the end, and that matters. Anderson is in his late 50s. In 2020, he became a father through surrogacy. He named his son Wyatt Morgan Cooper, after his father. The grandfather that child will never meet, the man who died on a Tuesday in January 1978 and left a 10-year-old boy who spent 40 years learning to carry the absence. Anderson has said publicly that since Gloria died, he is the last of his immediate family. The last one who remembers what they were before the losses began. He is the keeper of the story, which may be why he keeps telling it. And Carter, who will always be 23 years old, who asked if he would ever feel a gun and was gone before anyone could answer. His death is the fixed point everything else orbits. Gloria painted him for 30 more years. She spoke about him with a tenderness that deepened as she aged, as if she were getting closer to where he was. Anderson has said everything about how he's lived his life, the risk, the relentless forward motion, going toward the world's worst stories, traces back to Carter, to that phone call on a July evening, to the knowledge that his brother was gone and he wasn't there, and he would spend the rest of his life figuring out what it means to be the one who survived. Here is what this story is not. It is not a moral about wealth. It is not proof that money ruins everything. Here is what it is. It is the story of a woman wounded so early that the wound became structural. She grew up in a courtroom, reduced to a verdict, and spent 95 years building a family that felt like the opposite of that. She mostly succeeded. 4 sons who loved her, in their own ways, from their own distances. A marriage that felt like home for 14 years. Art that outlasted everything, and at the very end, a real conversation with her youngest son. Honest in the way most of us never manage with the people we love most. That said everything that needed saying. Gloria Vanderbilt once said, "I have always been in a hurry. I have always been frightened that it would all be taken away." She was right to be frightened. Things were taken. Wyatt on a Tuesday in January. Carter on a Friday evening in July. Christopher to 38 years of silence, though he found his way back before the end. And then herself, at 95, without fear. But here is what wasn't taken. The paintings, still vivid, still speaking. Anderson naming his son after a grandfather the boy will never meet. Christopher somewhere still making music under a name the world doesn't know. Stan still tending gardens, still living the quiet life nobody else in his family managed to hold. And Carter, frozen at 23, present in every canvas his mother painted in the 30 years after he fell, still there, still asking his question, will I ever feel again? Gloria Vanderbilt spent 31 years sitting with that question, and I think if she could have answered it, she would have said yes. Not easily, not without scars, but yes, you will feel again. You will survive things that seem unsurvivable, get up the morning after, and make something. And the making will keep you alive until the living starts to feel like enough. That is what Gloria Vanderbilt spent 95 years proving, and she proved it all the way to the end.